Hey, Chad Peterman here, your host of the Can't Stop the Growth podcast, a show that advances the home services industry and beyond. For today's episode, I'm about to pass the mic to our partners at Smart AC for their special monthly series on all things innovation and business. Together, we bring content that empowers you to build a positive, healthy workplace for you, your people, and your bottom line. So let me officially pass the mic to Smart AC for today's episode, chock full of insights that you can take and apply to your growth. Now listen and grow.
Hello, and welcome to Experience Matters, the monthly series created by and for entrepreneurs and leaders, specifically in the home services industry. Whether you're navigating the integration of cutting-edge technology, expanding your team, or aiming to elevate your brand experience, we've got you covered. Each month, we'll bring practical solutions, innovative concepts, and insider knowledge to fuel the growth of your business. Along the way, we'll feature several industry leaders to share their knowledge and insights. We appreciate you being here. Let's get started. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Experience Matters podcast. We are fortunate enough to be participating in the Can't Stop the Growth series with Chad Peterman. So thank you, Chad and team, for having us. My name is Andy Fuselier, here with Josh Teekell, and we are your hosts. In our Experience Matters podcast, we'll be using our unique backgrounds, experience in entrepreneurship, leadership, innovation, bringing you all sorts of fun stories, interviews, facts, features on topics we think you'll enjoy. So Joshua, why don't you tell them what we're going to cover a little bit today?
Yeah, so today we're talking about innovation. We'll be walking through the process that entails and really outlining the things that make it go well and the things that make it go badly.
So yeah, when I think of innovation, there's a quote that often comes to mind for me that says, innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So I think that sums up what our experience has been together. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I think, ideas are cheap, of course. And, if I had a nickel for every time somebody called me with a great idea, I'd have a lot more nickels. And of course, effectively, you've got to, take that next step of deciding that you're going to do the thing and then going through the process that we're going to outline today to give yourself the best chance of success.
So there's a specific reason why we decided to call this episode Innovation is a Process, right? A lot of people think of an idea or the creativity aspect of it and think that's innovation. But I think what we've seen specifically together here at smartac.com is it takes a whole lot more for an organization to implement anything, right? And good ideas are a dime a dozen. I love to jump into some of those. That's a lot of where I spend my time around like who it starts with, right? So you're CEO of this company. You also own another company. Tell me about the vision casting. And let's say someone brings you a good idea. Obviously, you've got to be bought in, right?
I think vision casting is a really important part of any business, especially as the leader. You're going to have to see it in your mind's eye and then be able to articulate it well to the team, telling the what you want to do, the why you want to do it, and painting a picture of where you're going to be after you do it. I think it's important also not to have too many initiatives at once, which is not my strong suit. But yeah, I think in general, you want to rally the team, explain why you want to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and then incentivize them correctly as well. I think it's really important that they have the what's in it for me covered. It doesn't have to be huge, but it needs to be adding to the excitement of the overall initiative that you're launching.
So before I jump into a bunch of the I guess, process aspects of it, maybe give me an example, or give our audience an example here of some sort of innovation from your background in one of the companies you've been involved with.
So my first company was a company selling backyard makeovers across Texas. And we had a pretty robust outside sales staff, but really didn't have an understanding of how to train over time without doing ride-alongs. And so you see a lot of software today where people can use that software to understand what's going on in the home. But back then we didn't have stuff like that, back 10 years ago or whatever. And so I actually bought like 40, 50 recording pens and tested them myself in the home to see if we could understand how we could get away with that without it being obvious. Texas is a one-party
Yeah, that's
state.
legal, by the way. So for our audience, it's legal.
It is in Texas. So as long as you know you're recording. So we recorded all those things on pens and then, came back and downloaded them onto the computer. And what was really interesting in that situation is that the dynamic changed dramatically when you had a ride-along where your boss was there with you. It actually changed for the homeowner as well because they're like, what's going on with this person? Why are they here? And we had lots of cover stories we tried and things of that nature. But when you use the pen, everything was the same as if, it would usually be. And so that was just, one example of trying to take a problem that needed a solution, think outside the box on, how you could go about doing that. And then in general, with any of these type things, you're going to have pushback, right? So they didn't like, having to wear the pen or having to download it afterwards or click it on or off. So there's obviously some change management type things that we had to go about, but the value, the juice was very much worth the squeeze. So that was just one, a lot of innovative things, hopefully over 15 years, but that was one that I was proud of.
So, you talked a little bit about the vision casting and leadership buy-in, especially at the executive level. What's been really cool on some of the things that we see and implementing smartac.com is there's a specific company we worked with. They issued, it was from the top CEO, it was an executive awareness letter. And he said to the entire organization, so everyone heard, actually a lot of exactly what you said. Here's an initiative we're going to bite off as a company. Here's why it's important. Here's what we expect the value to be. Here's what your role is. And although all of you may not be involved from day one, it's going to involve you somehow. And I thought that was super important because it set the tone so that no matter what conversation we had with any other employee in that organization, and a lot of what we do ends up being role-by-role training, role-based training, they knew about it, right? They expected it. And that was huge. Just setting the stage was awesome.
The certainty matters too, right? Even if you as a leader understand that, look, if this doesn't work, we might pivot. You don't lead with that, right? It's like we're burning the boats. We're doing this. This is what we're doing. There needs to be the certainty in the whole team that there's no wriggling out of this. I can't, come talk the leader out of it, right? Because when they think the leader is wishy-washy about something, they feel that, and they feel empowered to vocalize it to other people in the team as well. So certainly having that like all-in approach from the top is really important. Once you have done the testing, you've done your research, really you're not leading your team astray. Once you have that prerequisite knowledge, then I think you really do have to go all in.
Yeah, and I mean, even as an executive leader or leadership, you're never 100% sure, but you're starting from a hypothesis of information, right? You've done the research and you have the belief that it's going to be beneficial. There's nothing's ever 100%, right? So there's going to be some element of risk, but once you've made that decision, I agree. You have to have that confidence and you have to have that certainty to the team, and, with the acknowledgement that hey, we may tweak as we go, but we're going to start. And I think that is to me is the foundation of innovation, right? It starts with that core belief that this is going to make us better as a team, as a company, everything. And then setting that vision, getting the team's buy-in, and then really pushing that hypothesis out there, right?
We always talk about who is our champion inside of an organization, right? It's obviously important that someone takes ownership of it. Sometimes that's the owner if it's not a really large organization, but many times in a medium to larger size organization, you're going to have somebody on the team that has to pick up the torch and take ownership of that project. Managing the people, below them or at the same level, and then reporting upwards to the person, who set that vision from the beginning.
I think that's the single biggest way to ensure innovation fails is not define who the owner of that initiative is. I mean, we have certainly seen it. I think I've seen it in past in prior organizations, but absolutely, someone has to know that every day they wake up and it's their job to take that idea and implement it throughout the organization, to carry it out all the way through the end. Without that, that's certainly one of the, I'd say, missteps we've seen, because it's easy to get excited about an idea, right? And all of a sudden, owners spun up, organizations spun up, and then now 5 people own it, which means nobody owns it, right? You cannot implement an idea by committee. There's got to be a singular owner.
The person who does that has to have the same passion for that idea 6 months later, right? Because like you said, everyone's going to be excited about it if the leader does a good job of rallying the troops early on. But then, it's very likely that leader may have some other initiative 90 days later, right? And so those people are then excited about that new initiative, but you have to have that champion who still, hopefully, not only is driving it forward because he cares about it, but also because he's comped in that way too. And I really think I'm a huge believer in that you have to comp people, especially like exactly based on what you want them to do, like the output for the company, or what is the KPI, or what is the driving force of what you're trying to accomplish, and then try to tie as much percentage of the overall monthly comp for that person as you can to accomplishing that objective for that specific initiative.
So that's a great point. I think it flows well beyond the champion too, and it talks about compensation and understanding individual incentives. Incentives in organizations might take years to build. And so I think it's really important to understand, if we implement this idea, how is each individual impacted? How might their individual pay be impacted? And how might that change their motivation to carry out this idea? We've seen it work very well when every person is considered, right? Roundtable, right? Bring the people in the room and say, here's what we're thinking to do. How is this going to impact you and your group, your team that you run? And if that's not done, you find there's a lot of quiet, dissenting conversations that take place throughout an organization.
That's something I've always seen you do a really good job of when you're dealing with change management in an organization. You have the people in the room that may have those dissenting opinions, and you do a great job of saying, hey, what are the things you're thinking right now that are potentially negative that you're not saying? Because if you don't say them now, you're going to talk about it at the water cooler later, and we're going to find out that was a problem 6, 7, 8 weeks later, right? There's usually a solve. You just have to know that it's a problem that needs to be solved. And it's that early, brainstorm session with the leaders of each part of the organization that helps you understand those potential concerns.
Yeah, and where I try and consistently remind myself is while you're dealing with an organization, you're actually dealing with people, right? Each individual is different. You're going to have people that love change, love new things, and then you're going to have the person who's been doing the same job for 10, 15 years and loves the consistency. And so introducing something is potentially scary, disruptive to their day, and you don't know how that's going to impact them if you don't have those one-on-one conversations.
Yeah, I think it's just as important for them to understand how it's going to be good versus how it can be bad, right? So obviously you want to hear the potential negatives, but you have to paint a picture of the new world that's going to exist after we have success with this initiative, right? And that's got to be, here's your goals as an employee now, here's how you're comped, let's say, here's why you're, should be motivated, and here's how this new initiative is going to take the things you've already been working on and make it better.
I think that also speaks a lot to understanding the balance of an organization as a leader, knowing how your organization is built, your strengths and your weaknesses. And if you're not a natural people person, you need somebody on the team that is, right? Because you may be great at ideas, maybe great at passion, and you can bring these things in. If you're not going to sit down with each of the individuals and have those conversations because it's not something you enjoy, you've got to have someone in the room or a part of the team, that champion, right? We're talking about. That's the person who's okay doing that.
You have to kind of hypothesize what the difference is going to be, right? So that really comes down to your numbers and being able to understand the approach that we have been doing historically has this, KPI. And then you really have to hypothesize from going forward with this action, this product, this initiative, what are we hypothesizing the difference can be? And so one of the most important things I think early on is having the right people involved, so that you can book an early win and show the difference that's being made by that approach. And many times that will be actually a success with one of the more talented people in the group, right? And hopefully someone that people look up to or things of that nature, so that they can actually see, well, shoot, if this guy can do a good job at it, right? Well, he's the best person I've already been trying to emulate, right? And so I think it's once you have numbers to be able to show the impact of that new innovation, then it's really kind of pushing the ball downhill from there.
Yeah, and it's tough sometimes to want to have the motivation when the numbers overall already look good, right? I mean, we deal with a lot of very well-run, profitable organizations, and I think it's kind of the difference between seeing the forest from the trees. If the forest looks beautiful, sometimes you don't take the time to walk by and look at each tree and say, how can this be better?
No doubt. Well, they say what good is the enemy of great, right? And so I think you really kind of get in a rut as a very successful organization by not rethinking things that have gotten you there, right? Because many times what takes you from 1 million to 5 million to 10 million is probably not what's going to take you from 10 to 20 to 30. And sometimes that's a market change or the way the world changes or something like that. And sometimes it's just the way you interact with your team or the way you motivate your team and things of that nature. So I do think in general, you have to be rethinking, is what I'm doing optimal now for the way my business is structured today?
Well, I mean, technology moves so fast that there's constantly something new coming out, right? Like take our business, for example, couldn't have existed probably 5-6 years ago. Like when we started it, we were on the edge of it, but just because of what was available technology-wise, we were able to even build it. And I think a lot of these home service companies, they get so good at doing what they're good at, they don't step back and say, what's new that could help my business? Certainly the best ones do, right? A lot of the ones we work with, they're on it. They have innovation champions. That's their entire job. But if you're not, maybe you're somewhere in the middle, and you don't have the luxury of overhead to just look for innovation, then that kind of falls on you as the owner.
And many times it's actually incremental change too. So I actually like to start when I'm talking to someone that has had a lot of success by explaining that you have been doing it the perfect way for decades. There's nothing wrong with your approach, right? And all we're really asking is that you rethink with the tools at your disposal today, is now that approach optimal, right? And so you really have to take a step back and look at it with brand new eyes and see what you have at your disposal to decide whether or not you should tweak your approach, or maybe you find out, hey, no, I still think the tried and true method is correct. And what's interesting is that you're really never changing the psychology of the approach. You're just using a tool to accomplish that tried and true psychology better. So all the technology offerings and products you'll see in the space, they're really not reinventing anything. They're just making it easier to do what has already been proven in the past.
Yeah, you said sometimes you have to step back, and I agree with you. I look at it as a more tactical approach to that. Sometimes I think you have to step in, and that, I mean, go to the owner of a single department or a single activity and say, take me through what it takes to perform your task, to perform what you do for the company. And in those conversations, those discoveries, you might think, oh man, there's 3 things you've said that are inefficient. I wonder if there's a way, a tool, a technology, something that can change that. And so I think getting in sometimes into the people, into the details, is a way to discover incremental change, right? I'm not talking about wholesale, big, grand vision stuff, but the little things that maybe aren't as daunting as implementing something that's massive, right? I think there's a lot of ways that you can innovate to make your whole organization more efficient.
That may be automation. That might be just a slight tweak in the approach. I actually think it's really important too when you're going to be launching an innovation where there is going to be change management needed, that you look at the entire process of that person's role, let's say, where it touches the part of their role that's going to be impacted by the innovation. And you put it all on a time continuum and you point arrows to like, here are the 2 places or the 3 places where you're actually going to do something slightly different, right? It's like 94% of this is going to be the same. We're not starting from scratch. It's just right here, and right here are the places where, we're tweaking the approach. And obviously the more percentage that stays the same, the easier it is to enact that change. And many times it's better to get incremental change consistently than be jerking the team around with wholesale changes all the time.
The approach we have now when it comes to dealing with CSRs or CXRs, it's their craft, it's their art, right? The way they pitch, the way they sell memberships over the phone, it's what they've been doing. And so we literally say, the first thing we say is, let's start with what you're doing right, what's working. We're not touching that. What you say, the process, like your close rate's great. All we're seeing or asking, is there any little change that can make it better, right? Because I think it's as you said, it's so important to not mess up what's going, because ultimately you are testing in a way, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't impact the success they're already having.
It's important to be thinking about, if we make this tweak, what is the waterfall of that through the entire role and in each role, and understand, is there some, negative incentive or something that could go wrong because of the disruption to that role or to their process.
When you've gone through all the other stuff, right? Like executive decision, champion name, you now know that you want to start having a clear implementation roadmap, something that you're following systematically, that the team knows you're following, so it doesn't seem willy-nilly, right? Here's how we're going to start, guys. We're going to start with this group working on this aspect. I think that's super important, is so that everyone knows how they'll be impacted and over what time.
How far do you generally go when you're trying to do that with writing up the entire process? Do you have like a time period that we're outlining the first 60 days, 90 days? And then the second part of that would be, what do you think the right cadence is early on when you're trying to implement that change? So, and then how does that cadence change over the first 3-4 months?
The first part is, I don't think you try to get overly detailed on any implementation plan, right? I think you want to lay out overall objectives, both the groups you want to work with and the time frames you want to interact with those groups. And then know that each of those interactions is going to be somewhat individual. The way you talk with the GM and the process it might take going through that GM and his individual impact, as well how it impacts his team, is going to be a wholly different timeline than maybe training a technician on a new tool they're using, right? But I think there's an overall goal that you have, right? Let's say you're going to implement something and you want to have a working product in 90 days, right? And you communicate that widely. And then you have a general guideline inside of that, and you have the people that need to be involved during that process. And then there's fluidity, right, in there. And then the other question around cadence, early and often. Anytime you're implementing anything different, you cannot throw something over a fence and expect it to grow on its own, right? Like, you really have to oversee it. That's where the champion really comes in, is saying, we're going to be holding weekly meetings to reinforce the message. Because it's so easy to talk about something and then everyone says, yeah, it sounds great, and they go back to what they were doing, right? So I think, even if they're not involved specifically in that week, it's important that everyone hears again, right? Just a reminder, guys, Here's what we're going to be doing. Here's why it's important. And this week, we'll be working with the service manager on how that impacts his organization. Next week, it'll be the warehouse manager.
As a leader, I know you want to make sure you're kind of back channeling. That's probably the wrong word, but like you're testing this hypothesis and how it's going to hit your team before you're in a meeting with 10 people, right? So typically, are you going to the leaders in each one of those departments to get sign off on that, or to make sure they're seeing it the same way so that they can be advocates to the rest of the team?
What I have seen on the ones that do it very well is the champion, but then there's what I would call the war room, right? It's the selected individuals who are either influential or leaders in a department that get pulled in, and that becomes the implementation team. Their job is to not only fully understand at a deeper level what you're going to do, but then to build excitement outside that. Because you as a champion, right, you may be, let's say you're the VP of sales, and you're very personable, and you've got a lot of respect within the organization. So you can carry a big initiative, but you may not have the respect of service technicians, right? Because they look at you doing something very different. So you got to have the service manager in here in the war room with you. He's going to be the one that carries that direct message in, and it's going to come off way different being delivered from him in their Tuesday meeting, right after your Monday war room meeting.
Generally, we've seen the people that have success with new initiatives go and see how will this change sometimes in just one department. Like that initiative might just be in that department, sure. But what are the things upstream or downstream that will be impacted by it? And many times, and I've had this happen, obviously you and I have this all the time, where I'm like, we need to do this. And you're like, well, that also touches these other 17 things, right? So I think it's important to understand that. In general, would you have a small meeting with 3, 4, 5 people to run that out before you even have egg on your face with 15 people and they realize you didn't think of that?
100%. Absolutely. You've got to at least ask the question early, how will this impact the organization? And and beyond just we'll make a lot more money, right? Truly, how will it impact it, right? Let's go through our work processes. Let's go through our customer interactions, right? How might this impact those things? And you may not need answers to every one of those things immediately, but at least having the feedback of somebody who works on that every day is super important.
So from that point, let's say you take the initiative, you roll it out with the team. It's been 4, 5, 6, 10 weeks. What's the process look like if, as a leader, you look at the numbers, the difference, and you think it's not yet optimized?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to that, right? Post rollout. Number 1 is there's got to be accountability for the results and what's happening. And anything new, that needs to be fast. I mean, information needs to flow very quickly about what's happening directly back up to the top, to the champion and to the war room, right? Because you need to be able to make changes quickly on that, right? Nothing's done perfectly the first time. So the cadence post rollout is 3 times faster than the planning on the front side of implementation, because that's where the data's coming back in. And then you've got to be able to have a way to actually make sure you're getting data, right? So the foundation to all this that we started with was you need a system in place that's collecting data to know where you are, to know what you want, and to know what's happening as you're making changes to that.
How do you take into account statistical significance when you're rolling something out? Like, let's say, for instance, you've got a sales percentage of 20% or something like that, right? If you're only getting success 1 out of 5 times and you roll something out new, then there's a lot of variance in general. Your sales people may have a great month and be at 40%, and have a bad month and be at 8%, right? So there's this natural variance in the process. How do you find out or even plan how long do we need to let this test go before we can feel confident that the results we're seeing are real.
So this is where we see a ton of variance across the size of the organizations. The bigger, the more sophisticated, the more back end, the more data driven they are, it's very easy to look back and say, what was Q3 and Q4 last year? And as we're rolling it out, we're going to be looking at the rolling average now versus last year. And so you can pick up pretty quickly that the changes are happening in a comparative way. And there's all sorts of things that you got to normalize against. But generally, the more data you have in the past, the easier it is to define what you're doing now. What you can't ignore, though, is the anecdotal feedback, because that's also super important. And to do that, that's where the cadence of personal feedback needs to come in. It's asking the manager, how do you feel things are going? It's asking the individual CSRs, technicians, how are you feeling about that? It's asking, how is the customer? It's doing surveys. It's really, you're gathering data, but you're doing it in a different way.
So I've always put a whole lot of stock in that anecdotal feedback. And my answer to that question I asked you would be that if you go to your best people in the role that that this initiative is going to be touching, those best people are almost always the best because they not only understand the what, but they understand the why they do what they do, and how the psychology, especially if it's customer facing, how the psychology of what they're doing matters, right? And so what's interesting, you can go to those people and you can all you have to do is say, hey, here's the idea. And many times they will immediately either give you, it's usually polarizing. It's either like, that won't work, or, oh my gosh, let me go do it now, right? And then I actually think that you don't need weeks and months. Many times you can have your best person that maybe has 5-10 reps a day. If it's on the phone, maybe it's even more. And they can very quickly understand, and get a lot of anecdotal evidence even in a few days. And sometimes that is a good first thing to test before you even, consider what the plan is for rollout, because that can happen in 3 or 4 days. And you and I always go back and forth on whether or not that's realistic at a larger size organization. But I think it's really interesting that some of the bigger, even tech companies and things like that have opportunities or they set up the process where a smaller group of people can test something out with an MVP or even with the messaging to get feedback before considering scaling.
No, I mean, I think testing first is always better, right? No doubt. Like in anything you're doing, whether you're building a product, you're rolling out a new technology, it's got to start with testing. It's how each organization can do it that I think is the biggest difference. And look, obviously we're trying to cover a ton of information in a very short time. One last thing I'll touch on what you asked is the very first thing that we start with in that, what do you hope to achieve? It's exactly what you said. It's things we can measure in a week, things we can measure in a month, things we can measure in 90 days, and things we may not see for 180 days, right? And understand that all of those metrics are going to exist. And if you're okay knowing that, then what you are looking for is the quick wins to prove that you should continue to get to that next metric timeline.
Well, ideally, if you have those early indicators, they can be evidence, even if it's early, that the later lagging indicators are going to be good. And many times, you can have an initiative where even if just this first early indicator is better, everything else would be gravy, right? For like our business, one of our main KPIs is people signing up for memberships, right? And you won't know, what fault you're going to find or what sales opportunity there is a year or 2 or 3 years later. But if your conversion rate, goes up by 50%, because of his historical way that your business runs, that's really good, right? So sometimes those early indicators can be enough, but it is important to know, here's what we can prove out in the short term, and here's the numbers we want to be looking at over months and years to either confirm or prove false the hypothesis that we had early on.
Yeah. Well, Josh, I think we have filled their heads appropriately. We appreciate you guys for listening. There's so much more we could cover on this. I mean, This is literally where I spend a great majority of my time. I'm very passionate about. But I think what we want to leave you guys with is that number one, innovation is a process, but it's a process that has been proven over and over and over. And don't be afraid to take on the challenge to find ways you can improve.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.